Today we are going to talk to you about different types of substrate that are normally used to grow Phalaenopsis orchids. We frequently get many questions from our customers and viewers on what the right substrate is and what needs to be used in order to maintain and allow your orchid to thrive. Before we begin to discuss this subject, I would like to tell you some basic biological facts regarding any plant participating in the process of photosynthesis. Orchids actively participate in this process through their leaves and roots. As a result, the following conditions are necessary: ultraviolet rays from the sun or artificial lighting, water, components of air such as oxygen or CO2, and additional nutritional elements which orchids normally receive from its surrounding dead organic matter, which is naturally stuck between bark and stones surrounding the orchid in nature. Orchids use parts of their roots to ground themselves to their host, which is typically a tree or a rock, and the freely hanging air roots is what actively participates in the process of photosynthesis. This is why we try to mimic the surrounding natural environment of the orchid through the substrate we use, which is typically bark or sphagnum moss, which normally surrounds the orchid in tropical forests. You can, however, prepare your own substrate. It is super easy, and all you have to do is to go to a nearby park and see what you can find. The part you are interested in is a pine-infested area. It is important that you find a tree that is not living, as removing bark from a living tree can damage the tree. The bark also doesn't come off easily and may sometimes contain pine sap, which is toxic for orchids. Instead, try to find a freshly cut down tree for when you collect your bark. The bark on a cut down tree is usually very easy to remove. It is better to collect bark in late fall. This way, there aren't many insects present. If you do this process in the summer, try to shake off and leave all visible insects, such as spiders and worms, and so forth. Then simply remove the amount of bark that you wish to use and put it in a plastic bag to take home with you, where you will begin to shred and prepare the bark. In the same area, typically surrounding trees and so forth, you can find sphagnum moss, which is usually hiding under the grass in very moist areas. Moss is preferably collected in fall for the same reason as bark, as there will not be as many insects present. Moss contains natural particles of fallen leaves, grass, and branches, which is ideal organic fertilizer when these elements start to decay. Fresh green moss is very appealing and eye-catching and ideal for any great floral design. Sometimes people ask me if it is possible to contaminate orchids with parasites if you are collecting and using your own substrate. I say no, because it is not typical for tropical orchid parasites to be present in northern areas. You are more likely to bring in parasites in a new plant purchased from a flower shop or garden center where parasites are widely present. Overall, moss is just as suitable and terrific organic fertilizer and component of substrate that you can easily find in surrounding parks. Another good additional organic support for substrate used in Phalaenopsis orchids is fallen leaves, which you can also collect in the late fall from birch, oak, or maple trees. These leaves are ideally used shredded into smaller pieces and combined with other forms of substrate such as bark or moss. Make sure that you examine the leaves thoroughly and ensure that they are healthy and have no fungal infections, and you can do this by simply examining the surface of the leaves for any imperfection or suspicious looking spots. You can collect as much as you want and preserve it for an entire year. When you bring everything home, you have to break apart and prepare the substrate that you collected. Overall, the park beside your home is an outstanding resource. When preparing your substrate, you need to cut it into smaller pieces, especially when it comes to bark. Smaller pieces of bark allow the bark to maintain moisture better. You may choose to boil the bark for 10 to 15 minutes, dry the bark out, and then put it into paper bags and keep them for a whole year. As for the moss, you can simply wash it, dry it, and use it continuously. Do not remove any organic pieces from the moss, such as grass, leaves, or branches, which can naturally be found inside the moss. As previously mentioned, these organic pieces that are decaying inside of the moss are terrific fertilizer for the orchid, and it is essential to make sure that they are present and not removed. As for the leaves you've collected, you can simply shred it with a pair of scissors. It is important to shred your leaves to allow it to be safely and nicely mixed with the rest of the substrate and allow for water and drainage to effectively occur when your substrate is fully formed. For better circulation in the substrate, you may choose to mix it with volcanic perlite or vermiculite. If it isn't possible for you to purchase these substances, you can use packing foam for the same purpose. Usually, it's a good idea to place pieces of packing foam at the bottom of the pot to maintain excellent drainage. If you cannot find pine bark, for example, you can use simple pine cones. Just break them into small pieces and use them in your substrate. It is important to ensure that there is no sap on the surface or inside the pine cone. Another great addition for substrate is hardwood ashes, which can be mixed with different substrates for different results. If you typically use charcoal in your daily life, you can save the charcoal, break it apart with a hammer and add it to the media as well, as charcoal is a great source of potassium, which is crucial for orchids. There are many questions and arguments which arise on the subject of substrate, and I would like to say that if you are living in a house with a higher humidity, you should opt to use bark. Bark should be the biggest proportion of the media overall, because bark normally dries out faster and provides for better drainage and ventilation. But if you live in a place with low humidity, you should opt to choose moss. Moss has a very unique property and is able to maintain and absorb moisture readily. Furthermore, it does contain an essential antibacterial feature. Overall, decaying moss with dead organic matter inside it is a perfect fertilizer for the orchid. And, however, since the moss decays very quickly, the unfortunate inconvenience is that you have to change it once every 6 months as compared to the bark. But bark substrate decays more slowly because of the structure. However, it doesn't have as many nutritional components, so if you are relying only on bark, it is necessary to add mineral fertilizer or mix it in with something that is rich in nutrients, such as moss. In conclusion, feel free to explore your parks near your house to see if you can collect bark from cut down trees, sphagnum moss, and dried up leaves in the late fall season. All of these components work very well and are an inexpensive source of substrate that will help support your orchid. You can experiment with your orchid and choose which substrate works best for your living environment and your orchid overall. In the next video, we will discuss other details on orchid care. Thank you for watching and good luck.